Some purchases feel valuable for years. Luxury cars hold resale prices. Collectibles sell for fortunes. Properties rise in value. Markets constantly confirm what these things are worth, but history shows something strange. During severe economic collapse, some of the most expensive purchases become almost impossible to sell, not because the objects changed, but because the system that supported their value suddenly disappears. In those moments, the question is no longer, what did this cost? It becomes, who still wants it? And that shift reveals which purchases lose value first when the system breaks. Most modern purchases exist inside systems that quietly support their value. Markets provide liquidity. Banks provide credit that expands demand. Institutions enforce contracts and ownership. Together, these systems create confidence. When someone buys a car, they assume there will always be a buyer later. When someone buys luxury goods, they assume the brand will continue to signal status. When someone purchases property or collectibles, they assume markets will continue functioning normally. These assumptions rarely feel risky because during stable periods, they are usually correct. Assets can be sold, prices can be discovered, and transactions can be completed quickly. The system constantly confirms that purchases retain value. One of the most important forces behind perceived value is liquidity. Liquidity simply means the ability to turn something into cash quickly. A house has value partly because buyers exist. A stock has value partly because it can be sold instantly on an exchange. Even luxury items appear valuable because someone somewhere is willing to purchase them. As long as markets function smoothly, liquidity makes assets appear stable. Owners assume they can always exit a position. If they need money, they can sell. If prices rise, they can capture gains. Liquidity creates the sense that purchases are reversible, but that sense of reversibility depends entirely on functioning markets. Without buyers, value becomes theoretical. Behind most purchases sits a complex support structure. Banks provide financing that expands demand. Transportation networks move goods between markets. Legal systems enforce ownership and contracts. Trade networks allow products to circulate between regions. These layers quietly sustain the prices people see. When someone pays thousands for a luxury watch, they are not only buying the object, they are also buying into the system that supports its resale value. Prices often reflect expectations about the future. The expectation is simple. The system will continue functioning, buyers will still exist, markets will still operate, and value will still be measurable. Because these systems usually work, people begin treating value as permanent. Expensive items feel secure. Status purchases appear stable. Speculative assets seem safe as long as prices keep rising. But this stability depends on conditions that are rarely visible during normal times. Trust between buyers and sellers, access to credit, reliable price signals, and working institutions. When those conditions weaken, the rules that determine value begin to change, not gradually, but often very quickly. Objects that once seemed valuable can suddenly become difficult to exchange. And that raises an important question: which purchases depend most on the systems that support their value? When markets stop functioning, which purchases lose their value first? If you're interested in how hidden systems shape economies and history, this is what we explore here. Subscribe. Economic collapse rarely begins with empty shelves or visible chaos. It usually begins with something quieter. Trust begins to fracture. In stable economies, transactions rely on shared confidence. Buyers trust that prices are meaningful. Sellers trust that payments will hold value. Banks trust that loans will be repaid. These expectations allow markets to function smoothly, but during severe economic stress, those expectations begin to weaken. Lenders grow cautious. Buyers delay decisions. Sellers hesitate to accept payment terms that once seemed routine. The system still exists, but confidence inside it begins to thin. And when trust weakens, the signals that normally guide value start to distort. One of the first visible changes during economic collapse is the disappearance of liquidity. In normal conditions, markets are filled with buyers and sellers. Assets can be traded quickly, and prices adjust smoothly. But when uncertainty spreads, buyers begin to withdraw. Investors hold cash instead of purchasing assets. Banks tighten lending. Households delay major purchases. Markets that once seemed active begin to slow. Assets remain physically present, but fewer people are willing to buy them. Liquidity fades, and this is often the moment when certain purchases lose their market almost instantly. Luxury vehicles, for example, may still exist in perfect condition, but when buyers disappear and credit tightens, finding someone willing to purchase them becomes extremely difficult. Credit is another hidden structure supporting modern value. Many purchases depend on borrowed money. Homes are financed through mortgages. Vehicles are purchased through loans. Businesses expand using credit. Even financial markets rely heavily on borrowed capital. During stable periods, credit quietly expands demand, but during collapse, credit begins to contract. Banks become cautious. Lenders demand stronger guarantees. Borrowers struggle to refinance existing obligations. When credit tightens, many buyers simply disappear. Speculative real estate is especially vulnerable in these moments. Properties purchased mainly for future resale suddenly face a market with fewer buyers and limited financing. Without credit, demand collapses. Markets normally provide continuous price discovery. Buyers and sellers interact, and prices adjust to reflect supply and demand. These price signals help people decide what something is worth, but during economic breakdown, price signals become unreliable. Transactions become rare. Market activity slows. Sellers may list assets at previous prices, but buyers no longer appear. In these moments, the difference between price and value becomes visible. An object can still have a listed price, but if no one is willing to purchase it, the price becomes theoretical. One important pattern appears repeatedly in periods of economic disruption. Collapse does not affect every purchase the same way. Some goods remain useful regardless of financial conditions. Food retains value. Energy remains essential. Basic tools continue to serve practical purposes. But other purchases depend almost entirely on the systems that support their exchange. When those systems weaken, their value can disappear quickly, not because the object changed, but because the environment that supported its price no longer exists. During stable periods, price and usefulness often appear connected. Status purchases can feel valuable. Speculative assets can rise quickly. Luxury goods can command high prices. But during economic collapse, those categories begin to separate. Some purchases retain value because they serve practical needs. Others depend mainly on market perception. And when markets stop functioning normally, perception alone cannot sustain value. This is why certain purchases collapse first during economic crises. When economic systems break down, which purchases become worthless first. Consider a luxury vehicle purchased during stable economic conditions. In normal markets, these vehicles maintain resale value because buyers exist. Affluent households upgrade cars regularly. Financing allows buyers to spread large costs over time. Dealership networks make resale relatively easy. But during economic collapse, those supporting conditions disappear quickly. Credit tightens. Households delay expensive purchases. Discretionary spending falls sharply. The car itself still functions perfectly, but the number of potential buyers shrinks dramatically. A luxury vehicle may remain impressive, comfortable, and fully operational. Yet without buyers, resale value falls rapidly. Its price depended less on the car itself and more on the financial environment surrounding it. Speculative real estate often rises quickly during stable periods. Investors purchase property expecting future buyers to pay higher prices. Credit supports these purchases. Banks finance construction. Developers build projects assuming demand will continue, but speculation relies heavily on constant liquidity. When credit tightens and uncertainty spreads, speculative demand collapses. Investors stop buying additional properties. Financing becomes difficult to obtain. Projects slow or remain unfinished. Properties that once seemed valuable because of future expectations suddenly face a market with fewer buyers. The buildings remain exactly where they were, but the financial assumptions that supported their value disappear. Many collectibles derive value from reputation and perception. Rare watches, designer fashion, luxury art, and memorabilia associated with prestige or exclusivity. During stable periods, collectors compete to acquire these items. Auctions attract strong participation. Prices rise as buyers pursue status or rarity, but these markets rely heavily on discretionary wealth. When financial stress spreads, collectors become cautious. Auctions attract fewer participants. Potential buyers focus on preserving liquidity rather than acquiring prestige items. The objects themselves remain unchanged, but the network of buyers willing to compete for them shrinks quickly. Some purchases exist almost entirely inside financial markets. Their value depends heavily on investor confidence. During stable periods, strong liquidity allows speculative assets to rise rapidly because investors expect future buyers to pay more. But collapse changes investor behavior quickly. Risk tolerance falls. Liquidity disappears. Investors prioritize safety and stability. Assets that depended primarily on optimism suddenly lose demand. Prices fall rapidly because expectations collapse. The asset itself has not changed, but the confidence supporting its value has disappeared. Many expensive consumer goods depend on strong household confidence: luxury furniture, premium electronics, designer accessories. These items often sell well during periods of economic stability because households feel secure enough to purchase comfort and prestige. But during economic collapse, priorities shift rapidly. Households reduce discretionary spending. Budgets focus on necessities. Retail demand contracts. Items that once commanded high prices suddenly struggle to find buyers. Their usefulness remains limited compared with essential goods, and when spending tightens, usefulness becomes the dominant measure of value. Across these examples, the same pattern appears repeatedly. Luxury vehicles, speculative property, collectibles, speculative financial assets, and high-end discretionary goods all depend heavily on the systems surrounding them. They rely on credit, active markets, and confidence. When those systems weaken, the objects themselves do not change, but the demand supporting their price disappears. And when demand disappears, value can fall extremely quickly. If many expensive purchases become almost impossible to sell during collapse, what kinds of things suddenly become more valuable instead? Economic collapse does not remove value from the world. What it removes are the systems that normally support many prices. Credit shrinks, markets thin, trade slows. The institutions that coordinate complex economic activity begin to struggle. During stable periods, these systems allow value to expand into many directions. Luxury purchases gain value through prestige. Speculative assets gain value through expectations. Collectibles gain value through reputation. But when the supporting systems weaken, the structure holding those prices in place begins to disappear. When that happens, the meaning of value changes. People begin asking a different question. Not what might this sell for later, but something much simpler. What can this do right now? Value begins moving toward usefulness. Items connected to basic needs become easier to exchange. Food remains valuable because people must eat. Fuel remains valuable because energy and transport are still necessary. Tools remain valuable because they allow people to repair and produce. Basic shelter retains value because it provides stability and security. These items do not depend heavily on speculation or prestige. Their value comes from the role they play in daily life, and that role does not disappear when markets become unstable. This pattern appears again and again across different crises, not because the objects themselves change, but because the systems surrounding them change. Stable economic systems allow complex markets to exist. Those markets support prices for status goods, speculative assets, and luxury purchases. But when those systems weaken, those layers shrink. Value moves closer to direct usefulness. The fewer layers required to justify a purchase, the more stable its value tends to remain. The more layers required, credit, speculation, prestige, market enthusiasm, the more fragile that value becomes. Economic collapse does not randomly destroy wealth. It reorganizes what people consider valuable. Purchases built on confidence and speculation lose demand quickly. Purchases connected to basic human needs retain demand much longer. The objects themselves remain the same, but the systems supporting their prices no longer function the same way. What societies value is rarely accidental. Hidden economic systems shape those decisions. Subscribe to keep exploring these patterns. Economic collapse does not make everything worthless. It reveals which purchases depended on the system and which ones were valuable even without it.